The council chamber was filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. Ambassador Helen Carter stood at the human platform, her hands pressed against the metal railing as she listened. The room buzzed with hundreds of different voices, all speaking through translation devices. Some voices sounded like birds singing, others like rocks grinding together, and some were just electronic beeps that the translators turned into words. The Velcron commander stood at the center of the chamber. He was tall, covered in scales that shimmered under the lights with a long tail that moved back and forth as he spoke. His voice was deep and serious as it came through the translation system. "The Krythos Dominion has gathered 3,000 warships at the edge of our space," he announced. "They plan to invade our worlds. Every species that is part of this council must send ships to help defend us. The treaty says each member must send at least 50 warships." Helen felt her heart sink. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 20 years. They had sent explorer ships to distant stars and cargo vessels to carry trade goods. But for military ships, Earth had only one. The UES Valor was a small frigate that was built to patrol Earth's borders and chase away pirates. It was never meant to fight in a real war. When the Velcron commander pointed to the human section, Helen took a deep breath and spoke clearly into her microphone. "The United Earth government will send our military vessel to join the defense fleet," she said. The chamber exploded with noise. Some delegates made clicking sounds with their mouths. Others whistled or buzzed. The translation system struggled to keep up with all the voices talking at once. Most of them were laughing. A delegate from the Chithar species leaned forward. The Chithar looked like large insects with multiple arms and shiny black eyes. "One ship?" the delegate asked. "Surely the humans are joking. Even the smallest species among us sends 20 ships at minimum." "We send what we have," Helen replied. She kept her voice steady even though she felt embarrassed. "The UES Valor will represent humanity in this fight." The Velcron commander's eyes narrowed. His tail swished faster, which Helen had learned meant he was not happy. "Very well, one ship. Let us hope your species does not come to regret such a small contribution when the Krythos reach your worlds." 3 days later, Captain Jacob Hayes sat in his office on the Earth orbital station. He was reading the orders that had just arrived. Jacob was in his mid-40s with gray hair starting to show at his temples. He had fought in the mining wars in the asteroid belt 10 years ago, back when different corporations tried to claim the best mining sites by force. He had earned his command by being smart rather than by having the biggest guns. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park, sat across from him. She was younger, in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the orders on her datapad and shook her head. "They are sending us alone?" she asked. "Captain, the Valor is a good ship, but we are built for border patrol. We chase pirates and smugglers. We have 68 people on this ship. Some of those enemy vessels probably have crews of 5,000. Jacob nodded slowly. He understood her concern, but he had spent the last 2 days reading everything he could find about how galactic species fought their wars. What he found was interesting. "I know what you are thinking, Lisa, but I have read the reports. The way they fight in space is very old-fashioned. They line up their ships in big formations and shoot at each other until one side gives up or gets destroyed. They have been fighting this way for thousands of years." Commander Paul Griffin was also in the office. He was the tactical officer, the person who controlled all the weapons on the ship. Paul was tall and thin, always thinking 3 steps ahead in any situation. He stood near the wall with his arms crossed. "The captain is right," Paul said. "I have watched videos of their past battles. They fight like old sailing ships from Earth's history. They get close to each other. They fire their weapons and they just stand there taking hits until someone loses. They do not dodge or use tricks. They just trade shots back and forth. Then maybe it is time someone showed them a different way to fight," Jacob said quietly. The UES Valor left Earth's orbit 2 days later. She was not an impressive ship by galactic standards. She was only 200 meters long, which made her smaller than most apartment buildings. The crew of 68 people could all fit in one room if they needed to. Her weapons were simple compared to the massive energy cannons that other species used. She had railguns that shot metal slugs at very high speeds, missile tubes that could fire fusion warheads, and small laser systems to shoot down incoming missiles. But what the Valor lacked in size and firepower, she made up for in other ways. Human engineers had built her to be fast and able to turn quickly. They had learned from fighter jets and racing ships. The Valor could move in ways that bigger ships could never match. As they traveled through space using the quantum drive that let ships move faster than light, Jacob gathered his officers in the briefing room. He pulled up a holographic display that showed how galactic fleets typically fought. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the display. "They arrange their ships in neat rows and columns. They face each other and shoot until one side cannot fight anymore. They do not use the space around them. They do not try unexpected attacks. They just follow the same pattern every single time." Lieutenant Kevin Brooks spoke up. He was the chief engineer, the person who kept the ship running. Kevin was short and stocky with grease stains permanently on his hands from working in the engine room. "So what do we do differently, Captain?" he asked. Jacob smiled. "We fight like we are in a dogfight. We use speed and movement. We hit them where they do not expect it, and then we get away before they can hit us back. We do not try to win by trading shots. We win by making them chase shadows." Lisa Park started to understand. "You want us to fight like fighter pilots, not like battleship captains." "Exactly. We cannot win if we fight their way. We are too small and we do not have enough guns. But if we change the rules of the game, we might have a chance." The crew spent the rest of the journey practicing. They ran simulations where they attacked from strange angles. They practiced flying through obstacles that would be dangerous for bigger ships. They learned to work together so smoothly that the ship moved like it was alive. When the Valor finally arrived at the rally point where all the Allied ships were gathering, the crew stared at their screens in amazement. There were thousands of warships floating in space. Some were so big they looked like small cities. The crystal ships of the Luminar species sparkled like diamonds. The dark metal vessels of the Velcron looked like floating fortresses. Carrier ships from the Chithar species were surrounded by clouds of smaller fighter craft. The Valor looked like a tiny minnow swimming among whales. "All vessels. This is Fleet Commander Thrace," a voice came through the communication system. "Human vessel. You will take a position in the reserve formation. Your contribution is noted, but you will not be needed in the main battle line." Jacob opened a channel to respond. "Understood, Commander." Uweus Valor moving to assigned position. After he closed the channel, Paul Griffin shook his head. "They are putting us in the back where we cannot get hurt or get in the way." "Can you blame them?" Jacob asked. "From where they are sitting, we are a liability. One small ship that might get destroyed in the first 5 minutes. Let them think that. When the fighting starts, we will show them what a small ship can really do." 2 days passed while the Allied fleet waited. The crews trained and prepared. They checked their weapons and made sure their systems were ready. And then, on the morning of the 3rd day, alarms started ringing throughout the fleet. The Krythos Dominion had arrived. The enemy fleet appeared like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. 3,000 Krythos warships emerged from their faster-than-light travel all at once. Each ship was painted dark red and black, and their hulls were covered with weapons. The computers on the Valor counted each ship and updated the tactical display. "That is more than the intelligence report said," Lisa Park announced from her station. Her voice was calm, but everyone could hear the worry underneath. "They have at least 500 heavy cruisers and 200 dreadnoughts. The rest are destroyers." Jacob Hayes watched the enemy fleet begin to move forward. They were organized in a massive rectangular formation, all the ships lined up in perfect rows. It looked intimidating, seeing that much firepower moving together with one purpose. But Jacob also saw the weakness in it. They were predictable. "All fleet elements. Assume battle formation Delta 7. Fleet Commander Thrace's voice echoed through every ship's communication system. "Heavy elements to the front. Carrier groups maintain support position. All shields to maximum. Prepare to engage at optimal range." The Allied fleet began to move into position. Thousands of huge ships moved slowly into their assigned places. The formation was like a wall designed to present the most firepower while protecting each other with overlapping shields. It was a formation that had been used for 10,000 years. It worked because everyone knew it would work, but Jacob saw what was about to happen. Both sides would get close enough to shoot at each other, and then they would just stand there trading fire until one side could not take any more punishment. Ships would explode, people would die, and in the end whoever had more ships left would claim victory. "They are going to do exactly what the Krythos expect," Jacob said quietly. "This is going to be brutal. Should we ask permission to operate independently?" Paul Griffin asked from the weapons station. "Not yet. Let us watch the first part of the battle. I want to see how they react." The two fleets moved closer together. When they were about 500,000 kilometers apart, which was considered the best range for energy weapons, Fleet Commander Thrace gave the order. All vessels, open fire. Space lit up like 1,000 suns were born at once. Energy beams stretched across the darkness, hitting shields and exploding in brilliant flashes of light. Plasma torpedoes traced glowing paths between the fleets. The Krathos fired back with just as much fury. Their weapons hammered against the Allied shields in waves of destructive energy. The UES Valor sat in the reserve formation, far behind the main battle line. No enemy weapons reached back this far. No one was shooting at them. Jacob watched his tactical display carefully, studying how the battle developed. Ships on both sides were taking damage. Their shields flickered and dimmed under constant bombardment. But neither side was moving. They just stood there and shot at each other like two boxers who forgot they could move their feet. "Captain, the Velcron Dreadnought Guardian's Honor just lost its forward shields," Lisa reported. "They are rotating to show a fresh shield to the enemy." That was standard procedure. When shields on one side failed, the ship would turn to present shields that were still working. It gave the damaged shields time to recharge. It was effective but very predictable. Jacob studied his display for several more minutes. Then he saw what he was looking for. On the right side of the Krathos formation, one destroyer had moved slightly ahead of the others. It was probably eager to get into better firing position, but that meant it was separated from its nearest support ships by several kilometers. "Paul, target that Krathos destroyer on the enemy right flank, the one that has advanced ahead of their formation." Griffin looked at his tactical display and found the ship. "Captain, we are in the reserve formation. We have not been cleared to engage. I did not ask for permission. I gave an order. Target that destroyer." There was a pause while Griffin processed this. Then his hands moved across his controls. "Target locked. Railguns charged and ready. Kevin, on my mark, I want emergency thrust. Lisa, plot an intercept course that brings us in from below their formation plane." "Captain, if we leave formation without authorization, the fleet commander will be very angry," Lisa warned. Jacob allowed himself a small smile. "Only if we lose. Execute the maneuver now." The UES Valor's fusion drives flared to life with more power than they were normally rated for. The ship dropped out of the reserve formation and accelerated hard, diving below the plane where the two fleets were fighting. Down here below the battle, there was nothing but empty space and the distant stars. "What is that human vessel doing?" Commander Thrace's voice crackled over the fleet communication channels. "UES Valor, return to your assigned position immediately." Jacob ignored the communication. "Paul, time to target?" 40 seconds. "Captain, that destroyer has spotted us. They are trying to turn. Too late. They cannot bring their main weapons to bear in time. Lisa, prepare for evasive maneuvers after we fire." The Valor screamed across the distance between the two fleets. She was moving faster than any capital ship could track with their weapons. The Krathos destroyer tried to rotate to face this unexpected threat, but it was designed for broadside combat where ships sat still and traded fire. It could not turn fast enough. "In range," Griffin announced. "Fire." The Valor's railguns fired one after another. Metal slugs accelerated to incredible speeds shot across the remaining distance. At this close range, there was no time for the target to evade. The projectiles hit the destroyer's rear section where the shields were weakest. They punched through the energy barrier and tore into the hull. "Follow up with missiles, full spread," Jacob commanded. Fusion warheads launched from the Valor's missile tubes. They crossed the distance in seconds and detonated against the destroyer's compromised shields. The combined assault was too much. The destroyer's shields failed completely. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as internal systems overloaded. When the light from the explosions faded, the Krathos destroyer was tumbling through space, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches, all its weapons dark and dead. For a moment, the entire battle seemed to pause. Both fleets had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. A single small ship had broken formation, crossed the engagement zone, and killed a vessel 10 times its size in under a minute. "Bring us about," Jacob ordered. "Target the next closest enemy vessel. Lisa, evasive pattern. Do not let them get a clean shot at us." The Valor spun through space, her maneuverability allowing her to dodge and weave in ways that the big capital ships could not match. She fired as she moved, railgun rounds and missiles striking at Krathos vessels before she was gone, looping away at angles that made targeting her almost impossible. "Captain, we have multiple enemy ships trying to target us," Paul reported, "but their targeting computers cannot track our movements. They are designed to hit ships that move in straight lines and fight at long range. Keep them frustrated. Pick your shots carefully. We are not trying to win this battle alone. We are showing everyone else what is possible." The fleet communication channels filled with confused chatter. Ship captains from dozens of different species were demanding to know what the human vessel was doing. Some were angry that the Valor had broken formation. Others were confused about how such a small ship could be so effective. Then one voice cut through the chaos. It was Captain Vera Stone, commanding a Luminar cruiser on the Allied left flank. Her voice came through clear and determined. "Fleet Command requesting permission to adopt independent maneuvering. I believe the human approach has value." There was a long pause. Commander Thrace finally responded, and everyone could hear the struggle in his voice. His entire military career had been built on following established doctrine. But the evidence was right in front of him. The Valor had destroyed 3 enemy ships while taking no damage herself. "All vessels," Commander Thrace said slowly. "Independent maneuvering is authorized. All captains use your own judgment. Coordinate with nearby vessels. Make yourselves difficult targets." The Allied fleet began to change. Ships that had been locked in rigid positions started to move. They began to angle for advantage, to support each other in new ways, to attack from directions the enemy did not expect. It was chaotic compared to the orderly battle lines, but it was effective chaos. The Krythos fleet, still operating in their traditional formation, suddenly found themselves fighting enemies who would not stand still. Allied ships attacked from multiple directions, concentrated fire on weak targets, then moved away before return fire could be effective. The Krythos weapons, powerful as they were, could not hit targets that were constantly moving and dodging. "Super Dreadnought destroyed on the enemy left flank," Paul announced with satisfaction. "The Chithar carriers are using their fighters offensively now, swarming isolated targets." Jacob watched the tactical display transform. What had been a grinding battle of attrition was becoming something more dynamic. Ships were using tactics, actual tactics rather than just standing in line and shooting. The casualty rate for Allied vessels was dropping while Krythos losses were climbing. "Captain Fleet Commander Thrace is hailing us," Lisa said. Jacob opened the channel. The Velcron commander appeared on the screen. His expression was unreadable. "Captain Hayes, I do not know whether to commend." The 50 Krythos super dreadnoughts moved forward like mountains drifting through space. Each one was massive, armed with hundreds of weapons and protected by shields so strong that normal attacks barely scratched them. The tactical display showed them advancing in a tight formation, and wherever they went, Allied ships were forced to retreat or be destroyed. Jacob watched 3 Allied cruisers concentrate their fire on one super dreadnought. Their weapons hammered against the enemy shields in a brilliant display of light and energy. But when the light faded, the super dreadnought's shields were still holding. It returned fire with its main cannons, and 2 of the 3 cruisers exploded. The third managed to limp away with critical damage. "They are tearing through our battle line in sectors 3 and 4, Lisa Park reported. Her voice was steady, but Jacob could hear the worry underneath. "The new tactics are not working against these ships. They are too big and too well defended." Jacob nodded slowly. He had feared something like this might happen. The Krythos commanders were not stupid. They had watched the Allied fleet adopt new tactics, and they had responded by bringing in ships that were simply too powerful for those tactics to work effectively. Speed and maneuverability did not matter much when the enemy could take everything you could throw at them and keep coming. "Get me a channel to Fleet Commander Thrace," Jacob said quietly. The communication link opened. Thrace appeared on the screen, and behind him Jacob could see the organized chaos of the flagship's bridge. Officers were running between stations, trying to coordinate thousands of ships in a battle that was quickly turning against them. "Captain Hayes, I hope you are calling with a solution. Those super dreadnoughts are destroying everything in their path." Jacob took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest went against every military instinct. "Commander, I need you to order a general retreat." The flagship's bridge fell silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look at their commander. Thrace's eyes narrowed and his tail began to twitch rapidly. "Say that again, Captain. Order the fleet to fall back. Break contact with the enemy. I know how it sounds, but I need you to trust me." "Trust you?" Thrace's voice rose slightly. "Captain, humanity has been part of the galactic community for barely 2 decades. You command a single frigate, and you are asking me to order a retreat that will expose 12 inhabited worlds to Krythos invasion. I am asking you to let me win this battle, Jacob replied calmly. Those super dreadnoughts are powerful, but they are also slow. They are designed for fighting in formation, trading fire with other big ships. If the entire fleet pulls back, they will pursue. They will want to keep the momentum, to crush us while they think we are running scared. Thrace was silent for a long moment. And then what happens? Jacob pulled up a star chart and transmitted it to the flagship. There is an asteroid field at the edge of this system. Our ships can maneuver through it. Their super dreadnoughts cannot, at least not without slowing down significantly. We draw them into an ambush. We use the terrain against them. Galactic warfare does not use terrain, Captain. Space is too vast, which is exactly why it will work. They will not expect it because no one has done it in thousands of years. Commander, we have already proven that new tactics can succeed. Let me prove it one more time. Thrace studied the star chart. His tail was still twitching, but slower now, more thoughtful. Finally, he let out a long breath. If this fails, Captain Hayes, both our careers will end today. If we are fortunate, only our careers will end. I understand, sir. Thrace turned to his bridge crew and gave the order that went against everything he had been trained to do. All fleet elements, general retreat. Fall back to Rally Point Echo. Maintain formation integrity, but disengage from current combat. Across the entire Allied fleet, ships received the retreat order. There was confusion at first. Some captains demanded clarification. Others asked if this was some kind of tactical maneuver. But orders were orders, and the fleet began to pull back. To the Krathos, it looked like a victory. The Allied fleet was running. Their new tactics had failed against superior firepower. The Krathos fleet surged forward in pursuit, eager to finish off an enemy that was fleeing. They are taking the bait, Lisa reported from the helm. The entire enemy fleet is pursuing, including those super dreadnoughts. Time to the asteroid field? Jacob asked. 3 hours at current speed. Paul, start coordinating with the fleet. I need every ship with long-range sensors to begin mapping that asteroid field. We need to know the position of every rock, every piece of debris, every clear path through it. For the next 2 hours, the retreat continued. It looked convincing because in many ways it was real. The Allied fleet was falling back and the Krathos were gaining ground. The faster enemy destroyers began to catch up with the rear guard of the Allied fleet. Small fights broke out as Allied ships had to turn and fight to protect the slower vessels. Jacob hated every casualty report that came in. 3 more cruisers destroyed, a Chithar carrier crippled and abandoned, a Luminar world ship taking heavy damage as it covered the retreat of smaller vessels. Each loss weighed on him because he knew this was his plan. If it failed, these people would have died for nothing. Approaching the asteroid field, Lisa announced. All Allied vessels are receiving their assigned positions. The plan was complex and required precise coordination. Jacob had divided the Allied fleet into hunter groups, with each group assigned to a specific zone within the asteroid field. The Valor herself would serve as bait, leading the enemy deep into the trap. All ships, this is Captain Hayes, he transmitted on the fleet command channel. When the Krathos enter the field, do not engage immediately. Let them penetrate deep into the belt. We need them committed, surrounded before we spring the trap. Wait for my signal. The Allied fleet plunged into the asteroid field. Ships weaved between tumbling rocks, some as large as cities. They disappeared into the shadows of massive asteroids, hiding and waiting. The Krathos fleet followed, their formation beginning to loosen as they had to navigate around obstacles. Their super dreadnoughts are falling behind, Paul observed. The smaller ships are pulling ahead because they can maneuver better. Perfect, Jacob said. Lisa, bring us about. Slow down just enough to make them think they can catch us. The UES Valor rotated in space, her weapons tracking the pursuing Krathos destroyers. She fired a few shots, not trying to kill, but just making it look like she was making a desperate stand. Then she resumed her flight deeper into the asteroid field as the enemy closed in. They are spreading out to avoid the larger asteroids, Lisa reported. Formation cohesion is breaking down. Jacob watched his tactical display like a chess master studying the board. The Krathos fleet was now strung out across dozens of kilometers, separated by asteroids and debris. The super dreadnoughts were trying to push through, but they were so large that they had to move slowly and carefully. The smaller enemy ships were far ahead, chasing what they thought was a defeated foe. All ships, Jacob transmitted. Execute ambush now. The asteroid field exploded with activity. Allied vessels that had been hiding in the shadows of large asteroids suddenly appeared, weapons blazing. The Krathos found themselves under attack from every direction, hemmed in by both terrain and enemies. "Target those super dreadnoughts," Jacob ordered. "They are too big to maneuver effectively here. Concentrate fire." The Valor joined a dozen other ships in targeting the nearest super dreadnought. The massive vessel tried to bring its weapons to bear, but asteroids blocked many of its firing solutions. It was too large to dodge the coordinated assault that came from multiple angles. Railgun rounds and missiles converged on its position, overwhelming shields and punching through armor. "Super dreadnought destroyed," Paul announced with satisfaction. But the Krathos were fighting back hard. Their destroyers and cruisers, though ambushed, were still dangerous. Energy beams lanced through the asteroid field, targeting Allied ships. Explosions lit up the darkness as vessels on both sides took hits. "Damage reports coming in from multiple Allied vessels," Lisa said. "The Chithar lost 2 more carriers. The Velkron battlecruiser Honor's Edge is reporting critical damage. Tell all damaged ships to fall back to the far side of the asteroid field," Jacob ordered. "We need to keep the pressure on, but not at the cost of losing ships we can save." The battle raged through the asteroid field for the next hour. It was chaotic and brutal. Ships hid behind asteroids and then struck when the enemy passed. The super dreadnoughts, caught in terrain they could not navigate effectively, were being picked apart by coordinated strikes. But they were taking Allied ships with them, their powerful weapons still deadly even when constrained. Jacob was coordinating attacks across the entire battlefield, directing ships to strike where the enemy was weakest, ordering retreats when positions became untenable. The Valor darted through the chaos, too fast for the enemy to pin down, adding her firepower wherever it was needed most. "Sir, enemy fleet is attempting to withdraw," Paul reported. "They are trying to pull back to open space. Do not let them regroup. All ships pursue and harass. Keep them separated and off balance." The battle became a running fight through the asteroid belt. The Krathos were retreating now in truth, their formation shattered, their super. 3 months after the Battle of Andara, Captain Jacob Hayes stood in front of a large auditorium on the planet Tharsis Prime. The room was filled with military officers from 30 different species. Some sat in chairs designed for their specific body types. Others floated in special containment fields. A few stood at the back because their bodies were too large for the seating arrangements. The Galactic Naval Academy had never had a human instructor before. They certainly never expected one to be teaching a course to fleet commanders who had centuries more experience than the entire human species had been traveling in space. But here Jacob was, with Lisa Park and Paul Griffin standing beside him, about to teach these experienced officers about warfare. For 10,000 years, galactic warfare has followed the same basic principles, Jacob began. His voice was translated into dozens of languages by the computer system. Large fleets, rigid formations, sustained firepower exchanges. These tactics worked because both sides understood them and had defenses designed for them. He activated a holographic display that showed the traditional battle lines from the first hours of the Andara battle. Ships lined up neatly facing each other across the void. But just because your enemy knows how you will fight does not mean you have the only way to fight. What we demonstrated at Andara was that there are other approaches that can be more effective precisely because they are unexpected. A Velkron admiral in the front row raised a clawed hand. He was older, with scales that had dulled with age and wore medals from dozens of campaigns. "Captain Hayes, with respect, humanity won one battle using surprise tactics. That does not make you qualified to restructure military doctrine that has served us for thousands of years." Jacob nodded respectfully. The admiral's skepticism was understandable. "You are absolutely right, Admiral Krenth. One battle proves only that something can work once, not that it will work reliably. Which is why over the past 3 months, the UES Valor and 7 other vessels have been conducting exercises with various fleet elements." He pulled up new data on the holographic display. Charts and graphs filled the air, showing the results of dozens of simulated battles. In 47 simulated engagements against traditional fleet formations, forces using human tactical doctrine won 42 times, lost twice, and achieved stalemate in 3 scenarios. More importantly, when both sides used flexible tactics, the quality of combat improved dramatically. Ships survived longer, objectives were achieved more efficiently, and commanders had to think rather than follow predetermined battle plans. A Chithar commander leaned forward, its mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "You are saying our old ways made us predictable? I am saying that any doctrine, no matter how effective it once was, becomes a weakness when everyone knows exactly what you will do. Evolution works in warfare just as it does in nature. Adapt or die. Lisa Park stepped forward and activated a different section of the display. It showed footage from the Andara battle, specifically the Valor weaving through Krythos formations. "Let us talk about movement," Lisa said. "In traditional galactic combat, ships move slowly or not at all. They rely on armor and shields to absorb damage while they deliver their own firepower. This works when both sides fight the same way." The footage showed the Valor dodging between enemy vessels, too fast for their weapons to track effectively. But when one side refuses to stand still, when one side uses speed as a defensive tool, the entire equation changes. Your targeting computers are sophisticated, but they are programmed to track targets moving in predictable patterns. They struggled with the Valor because we did not move like warships were supposed to move. "So you suggest we rebuild our fleets with smaller, more maneuverable vessels?" another officer asked. The skepticism was clear in the translated tone. Paul Griffin shook his head. "Not at all. Every ship type has its role. What we suggest is using all your ships more intelligently. A battleship does not need to be maneuverable if it has destroyer escorts that can screen it from attack. A carrier does not need heavy armor if its fighters create a defensive perimeter. It is about combined arms, mutual support, and thinking in 3 dimensions." Jacob resumed the presentation. "Let me give you a practical example. During the second day of Andara, after the Krythos deployed their super dreadnoughts, we could have continued our hit-and-run tactics. Eventually, we would have worn them down, but we would have lost hundreds of ships in the process." He showed the tactical map of the asteroid field ambush. The display illustrated how the Allied fleet had used terrain to negate the enemy's advantages. Instead, we used the environment. We drew them into a place where their size became a disadvantage, and their power was limited by having no clear targets. Their doctrine had no answers because it had never encountered this situation before. The lecture continued for several more hours. Jacob and his officers explained concepts that seemed obvious to them, but were revolutionary to the galactic military. They talked about combined arms tactics where different ship types supported each other. They discussed the importance of initiative, allowing individual commanders to make decisions rather than waiting for orders from fleet command. They explained how to use sensor networks to track enemy movements and anticipate their actions, but the real learning came in the practical exercises. The officers were divided into teams and given tactical scenarios where traditional approaches would fail. At first, they struggled. Their thinking was constrained by thousands of years of doing things one way. But gradually, they began to understand. A Luminar captain proposed using her vessel's crystalline hull to create a sensor network, detecting enemy movements across a wider area than individual ships could manage. A Velcron Commodore suggested using his heavy battleships as mobile anchors, around which lighter vessels could operate, creating a flexible defense instead of a static one. Ideas began to flow. Officers who had fought by the book for their entire careers were suddenly freed to think creatively. They started to see warfare not as a ritual to be performed but as a problem to be solved. And problems could be solved in many different ways. In the evening, after the formal sessions ended, Admiral Krenth approached Jacob in the Academy's observation lounge. The huge windows looked out over Tharsis Prime's rings, creating a stunning view of ice and rock reflecting the system's sun. "I owe you an apology, Captain Hayes," the old Velcron said quietly. "I doubted that humanity had anything to teach us." "I was wrong," Jacob smiled. "You were not wrong to be skeptical, Admiral. We are the newcomers here, but sometimes a fresh perspective is what is needed." "It is more than that," Krenth continued. His tail moved slowly, a sign of thoughtful contemplation. "We have been fighting the same way for so long that we forgot warfare is supposed to be creative. We turned it into a ritual, predictable and stagnant. You reminded us that combat is ultimately about solving problems, and there is always more than one solution." They stood together, watching the rings sparkle in the starlight. After a long silence, Jacob spoke again. "The Krythos Dominion is quiet now. Do you think the peace will last?" Krenth's tail swished in a gesture Jacob had learned meant uncertainty. "Probably not. They are rebuilding their fleet and learning from their defeat just as we are learning from our victory. When they come again, it will be with new tactics of their own. But we will be ready, not just with bigger ships or more weapons, but with better thinking, more flexible doctrine, and commanders who can adapt to anything." Over the following months, human influence on galactic military doctrine spread throughout Allied space. The UES Valor was no longer the only small ship, proving that size was not everything. Fleets across the galaxy began restructuring their forces. They incorporated human principles of maneuver warfare, combined arms operations and tactical flexibility into their training programs. But the impact went beyond just military changes. The presence of humans had a psychological effect on the galactic community. Here was a species that had joined recently, with limited resources and experience, and yet had fundamentally changed how war was fought. It made other species question their own assumptions and wonder what other innovations might be possible in other fields. Captain Jacob Hayes received a promotion to Commodore and was given command of a mixed species task force dedicated to developing new tactical doctrine. The task force included ships from a dozen different species, all working together to find better ways to fight. Lisa Park took command of the Valor. The ship that had started everything became the flagship of a squadron testing new concepts. Under Lisa's command, the Valor continued to push boundaries, proving that innovation was not a one-time event but an ongoing process. Paul Griffin became chief instructor at the Galactic Naval Academy. Young officers from across the galaxy came to learn from him. He taught them not just specific tactics but how to think tactically, how to analyze situations and find creative solutions. The UES Valor became legendary. Ships requested the honor of training with her. Young officers hoped for postings to her crew. She remained a small frigate, unremarkable in her specifications but remarkable in what she represented. She was proof that innovation mattered more than size, that thinking differently could change everything. The human crew members who had been at Andara. The alert reached Commodore Jacob Hayes while he was reviewing training exercises with his mixed species task force. The message was marked urgent and came directly from the Galactic Council's military command. He opened it on his datapad and felt his stomach tighten as he read the words. The Krythos Dominion had launched simultaneous attacks on 5 different systems along the border. Their fleet was moving with a speed and coordination that suggested they had learned well from their previous defeat. Intelligence reports indicated they were using small, fast attack groups instead of their traditional massive formations. They were adapting. Jacob immediately called his senior staff together in the briefing room. The holographic display showed the tactical situation across multiple star systems. Red icons representing Krythos forces were pushing deep into Allied territory. They are not fighting the way they used to, Commander Lisa Park said. She had traveled from the Valor to join this emergency meeting. Look at these attack patterns. Small groups hitting multiple targets simultaneously. They are using our own tactics against us. Paul Griffin nodded in agreement. They have divided their fleet into rapid response groups. Each group is hitting hard, and then withdrawing before our forces can respond effectively. It is exactly what we would do in their position. Jacob studied the display carefully. The Krythos had indeed learned from Andara. They were no longer the predictable enemy that lined up in neat formations. They had become dangerous in a new way, combining their superior numbers with the flexibility that humanity had taught the galaxy. How are our forces responding? Jacob asked. Mixed results, Paul replied. Some commanders have adapted well to the new situation. Others are still thinking in terms of traditional defensive positions. The Krythos are exploiting that inconsistency. Jacob made a decision. Get me a priority channel to Fleet Command. We need to coordinate a response that matches the threat and get the Valor ready for immediate departure. We are going to the front lines. Over the next several days, Jacob worked with fleet commanders across multiple systems to reorganize the Allied defense. The challenge was that while many officers had learned the new tactical doctrine, applying it in actual combat was different from practicing in simulations. The Krythos were providing a harsh education in real warfare. The UES Valor arrived at the Kepler system, which was under heavy attack. 3 Krythos battle groups were striking at the orbital facilities, while Allied forces struggled to mount an effective defense. The system's commander was a Chithar admiral who had attended Jacob's courses, but was now facing the reality that book learning and actual combat were very different things. Commodore Hayes, thank you for coming, Admiral Curzon said over the communication link. His translator carried the stress in his voice clearly. The enemy is hitting us from multiple directions. Every time we move to counter one group, another strikes from a different angle. Jacob watched the tactical display. The Krythos were executing a classic dispersed assault, keeping the defenders off balance and unable to concentrate their forces effectively. It was good tactics, which made it a serious problem. Admiral, you are trying to defend everything, which means you are defending nothing effectively. We need to change the nature of this engagement. What do you suggest? Let them think they are winning. Pull your heavy ships back to defend only the most critical orbital facilities. Make it look like you are consolidating for a last stand. There was a pause. And when they move in for what they think will be a final assault, then we hit them with everything we have, but not in the way they expect. I am bringing in additional forces from the surrounding systems. When the Krythos commit to their attack, we will trap them between your defensive forces and my relief fleet. It took 6 hours to coordinate the movements of dozens of ships across light years of space. Jacob used every favor he had earned, every connection he had made over the past 2 years. Ships that were in other systems jumped to Kepler, arriving one by one to take up hidden positions. The Krythos saw the Allied forces pulling back and assumed they were winning. Their 3 battle groups began to consolidate, preparing for what they thought would be a decisive strike against the weakened defenders. All units, this is Commodore Hayes. Jacob transmitted on the command channel. Execute the trap on my mark. The hidden Allied ship suddenly appeared on sensors, their faster-than-light drives shutting down as they materialized around the Krythos forces. At the same time, Admiral Curzon's defensive fleet surged forward instead of continuing to fall back. The Krythos found themselves surrounded, caught between 2 forces. But the Krythos had learned too. Instead of panicking, their commanders immediately began executing breakout maneuvers. They had clearly planned for the possibility of being trapped. Their battle groups split into even smaller units, each trying to find a weak point in the encirclement. They are adapting to our counter-tactics, Lisa Park reported from the Valor's bridge. Some of their ships are going to break through. Then we adapt again, Jacob replied calmly. All ships abandon the encirclement. Reform into hunter-killer groups. 3 ships per group. Do not try to hold them in place, just make sure none of them escape intact. The Allied fleet dissolved its surrounding formation and reorganized into smaller hunting packs. When Krythos ships tried to escape, they found themselves pursued by coordinated groups that harassed and damaged them. The battle became a running fight through the Kepler system, with neither side able to achieve a decisive advantage. After 8 hours of combat, both fleets disengaged by mutual exhaustion. The Krythos had failed to destroy the orbital facilities, but they had inflicted significant damage. The Allied forces had prevented a catastrophic defeat, but they had not achieved victory either. In the aftermath, Jacob met with his senior staff and the system's defenders. The mood was somber despite having held the system. This is the new reality, Jacob said to the assembled officers. The Krythos are no longer the enemy we defeated at Andara. They have learned and adapted. This war is going to be different from the last one. Admiral Curzon's mandibles clicked in frustration. If both sides know the new tactics, how do we gain an advantage? We are back to both sides understanding how the other fights. Not exactly, Paul Griffin said thoughtfully. We taught the galaxy how to fight with flexibility and creativity. The Krythos learned those lessons too. But the key is that we need to keep innovating. The side that stops learning is the side that loses. Over the following months, the war developed into a conflict unlike any the galaxy had seen. Both sides used flexible tactics, adapted to each other's moves, and constantly sought new advantages. Battles were shorter but more frequent. Casualties were lower per engagement, but the war spread across more systems. Jacob found himself constantly traveling between systems, not to command battles directly, but to help local commanders think through problems and develop solutions. The war required not just good tactics, but good tactical thinking, the ability to analyze situations and create appropriate responses. In one system, he helped a Luminar commander use gravitational anomalies to predict enemy jump points, allowing the defenders to ambush Krythos forces as they arrived. In another, he worked with a Velkron admiral to develop a mobile defense network that could respond to threats faster than the enemy could exploit. Openings, the human contribution to the war effort grew beyond just the military. Human engineers worked on improving ship systems. Human scientists helped develop better sensors and communication systems. Human diplomats helped coordinate the efforts of dozens of different species with different cultures and priorities. The UES Valor, under Lisa Park's command, became a troubleshooter, rushing to crisis points where the fighting was heaviest. Her crew had grown to include members from multiple species, all working together to prove that the human way of fighting could still be effective even when the enemy knew it was coming. 1 year into the Second War, Jacob received an unexpected communication. It came through diplomatic channels rather than military ones, and it originated from deep within Krythos space. The message was simple, a request for negotiations. The Galactic Council debated for days whether to accept. Some argued that the Krythos were simply buying time to regroup. Others pointed out that both sides were suffering from the prolonged conflict, and neither had achieved decisive advantage. Jacob was asked to give his opinion to the council. He stood before the same chamber where Ambassador Helen Carter had once announced Earth's contribution of a single ship. The Krythos are not asking for peace because they are losing, Jacob told the assembled delegates. They are asking because they recognize what we should also recognize. This war could continue indefinitely. Both sides can fight effectively. Both sides can adapt to what the other does. We could grind each other down for decades. So you recommend we accept their offer? The Velcron representative asked. I recommend we at least listen to what they have to say. Warfare is about achieving objectives, not about fighting for the sake of fighting. If we can achieve security for our worlds without further bloodshed, we should at least consider it. The negotiations took place on a neutral station at the edge of explored space. Jacob attended as a military advisor, though he spent most of his time listening. 5 years after the Battle of Andara, the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. The peace treaty between the Allied forces and the Krythos Dominion had held, growing stronger with each passing year. Trade routes that had once been battlefields now carried merchant vessels from dozens of species. Military officers who had fought against each other now trained together. Captain Lisa Park stood on the bridge of the UES Valor, watching through the view screen as her ship approached Earth's orbital station. She had commanded the vessel for 3 years now, and during that time the Valor had become more than just a ship. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when someone dared to think differently. Docking procedures initiated, her helmsman announced. He was a young Chithar officer named Kren, who had requested assignment to the Valor specifically because of its reputation. We should be locked in within 10 minutes. Lisa nodded, thinking about how much had changed. Her crew of 68 had grown to include members from 7 different species. The Valor herself had been upgraded with new systems developed through cooperative research between human, Velcron, and even Krythos engineers. She was still the same small frigate in size, but her capabilities had grown tremendously. The purpose of this visit to Earth was special. The Galactic Council had approved the construction of a memorial at the orbital station, dedicated to all those who had fallen in both wars. More importantly, they were establishing a new institution, the Hayes Institute for Strategic Innovation, named after the man who had changed everything. Commodore Jacob Hayes was retiring from active military service. At 50 years old, he had decided it was time to step back from commanding task forces and instead focus on teaching the next generation. The institute would be his legacy, a place where officers from all species could come to learn not just tactics, but how to think tactically. Lisa found Jacob in one of the station's observation lounges, looking out at Earth below. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, the blue and white sphere that had sent a single ship to change the galaxy. Feeling nostalgic, sir? Lisa asked as she approached. Jacob smiled without turning from the window. A little. I keep thinking about that day when we got the orders to join the fleet at Andara. We had no idea what we were getting into. We thought we would be lucky to survive one good fight, Lisa said, coming to stand beside him, and instead we started a revolution in military thinking. Jacob finally turned to face her. How's the old girl handling? The Valor is as nimble as ever. The new engines Kevin Brooks designed give us even better acceleration without sacrificing maneuverability. The mixed species crew works together better than I could have hoped. Good. That ship deserves the best. Jacob paused, then asked, Have you heard the latest from Paul? Lisa nodded. Paul Griffin had remained at the Galactic Naval Academy as chief instructor. Under his guidance, the academy had transformed from an institution that taught rigid doctrine into one that encouraged creative thinking and problem-solving. He says his newest class includes 3 Krythos students who scored at the top of their tactical simulations, one of them developed a defensive strategy that even he had not considered. Jacob laughed. The students are surpassing their teachers. That is how it should be. Each generation should be better than the last. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Earth slowly rotate below them. Finally, Lisa spoke again. I have been thinking about what you said at Andara, about how we needed to think differently. It was not just about the tactics, was it? It was about questioning assumptions. That is exactly right, Jacob agreed. The tactics were just the surface. The real change was in mindset. For thousands of years, galactic warfare followed certain patterns because everyone assumed those were the only patterns that could work. We showed that assumptions can be wrong. And now everyone questions their assumptions, not just in warfare but in other areas too, Lisa added. I was reading about the new propulsion research. Scientists from a dozen species working together, sharing ideas that none of them would have considered alone. Jacob nodded. That might be the most important legacy of what we did. Not the specific tactics, but the idea that cooperation and fresh thinking can solve problems that seem impossible. The memorial dedication ceremony took place the next day. Thousands of people gathered at the station, both in person and through holographic links from across the galaxy. The memorial itself was a beautiful sculpture made from materials provided by every species involved in the wars. It showed ships from different fleets flying together, neither attacking nor fleeing, just moving forward in unity. Ambassador Helen Carter gave the opening speech. She had aged in the years since she had stood before the Galactic Council and announced Earth's contribution of one ship. Her hair was gray now, but her voice was still strong. We gather to remember those who fell in 2 wars that changed our galaxy, she began. The first war taught us that the old ways were not the only ways. The second war taught us that even new ways must constantly evolve. Together, these conflicts showed us that our greatest strength lies not in our weapons, but in our ability to learn and adapt. She gestured to the memorial. This sculpture represents ships from Allied and Krythos fleets flying together. It reminds us that today's enemy may be tomorrow's friend, and that peace is always worth pursuing. When it was Jacob's turn to speak, he walked to the podium slowly. He had prepared remarks but found himself setting them aside. I am not a philosopher or a diplomat, he began simply. I am a ship captain who was given an impossible task and somehow managed not to fail completely. But I did not do it alone. Every person here, every person watching from across the galaxy, you all contributed to what happened. He paused, gathering his thoughts. When Earth sent the Valor to Andara, many species laughed. One small ship from a young species, what could it possibly contribute? But that one ship represented something important. The willingness to try, even when success seems impossible. Jacob looked out across the assembled crowd. He saw humans and Velkrans, Chithar and Luminar, even Krythos officers standing together. The Valor proved that size does not determine importance. Innovation matters more than resources. Creativity beats tradition, and cooperation achieves more than competition. These are the lessons we learned together at tremendous cost. We owe it to those who paid that cost to remember what they taught us. After the ceremony, Jacob spent time talking with young officers from various species. They all had questions about tactics, about decision-making, about leadership. He answered as best he could, but kept emphasizing the same points. Question assumptions. Learn continuously and never stop innovating. Later, at a smaller gathering with his closest colleagues, the conversation turned more personal. Admiral Krenth, the Velkran who had once doubted human contributions, raised a glass in a toast. To Jacob Hayes, who taught an old warrior that he still had much to learn. Jacob returned the toast. To all of us who learned together. Kevin Brooks, now heading the Joint Propulsion Research Project, added his own thoughts. You know what I find most interesting? The technology we are developing now would not exist without the cooperation that came from the wars. Scientists sharing ideas across species boundaries. Engineers combining different approaches. The Valor's original engines were human-designed, but the new ones incorporate principles from 4 different species. That is the pattern throughout the galaxy now, Paul Griffin observed. Not just in military matters or technology, but in everything. Art, music, literature, philosophy. Species are sharing and combining their knowledge in ways that never happened before. Lisa Park smiled, all because one small ship refused to follow the rules. The Valor did follow rules, Jacob corrected gently. Just not the rules everyone else was following. There is a difference between breaking rules for the sake of it and finding better rules to follow. The conversation continued late into the evening. Friends and colleagues reminiscing about battles fought and lessons learned. But underlying it all was a sense of hope. The wars had been terrible, but they had led to something better. A galaxy where different species worked together, learned from each other, and built a future that none of them could have created alone. The next morning, Jacob began his work at the new institute. The first class of students arrived from across the galaxy. They were young officers eager to learn, minds not yet set in rigid patterns. Jacob looked at them and saw potential. "Welcome to the Hayes Institute," he told them. "You are here to learn about warfare, but not in the traditional sense. You are here to learn how to think about problems and find creative solutions. Some of you will go on to military careers. Others will become scientists, diplomats, or explorers. Whatever you do, the skills you learn here will serve you." He activated a holographic display showing the Battle of Andara. The students watched as the tiny UES Valor dove into the midst of a massive fleet engagement. "This battle changed the galaxy," Jacob continued, "but not because we won. It changed things because we showed that questioning assumptions could lead to better outcomes. Your job as the next generation of leaders is to keep questioning, keep learning, keep innovating." A human student raised her hand. "Sir, if the Krythos had not attacked it,